This is Jim Porter, and the channel is Skeptical Spectrum. Steve Browne, please introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Steve Browne. I am Vice President, Director of Human Resources at Wigginton Corporation, a specialty trade contractor headquartered in Sanford, Florida. In addition to my day job, I also teach various human resources courses at Seminole State College, including HR law, compensation benefits, recruiting, and general introduction to human resources.
Did you always know you were going to be in human resources?
No, and I don't think really anybody does. I don't think, as far as what I know, most of the effective human resource people, most of them did something else before. And also, really, human resources didn't exist as a vocation really until probably in the last 30 or 40 years. That, you know, you had a personnel office and they were in charge of staffing, they were in charge of onboarding, offboarding of employees, maybe planning the Christmas party. They were in charge of making sure that you know, if you had to get badged in, that you got your badge. They took the pictures. Maybe they did the employee newsletter and a few things like that. That was your typical personnel department.
Wow.
But things evolved as we became more of thinkers, and as we became more of a technological society, that things really changed. That the idea of human capital or people as resource, that really sort of changed. That now it was no longer just the line managers, but also it was really more of the psychology, and a lot of things have changed too as far as employment law. That, you know, prior to 1964, really the only employment law you had to be aware of was the Fair Labor Standards Act, which was passed in 1938, which is where we get not Social Security, where we get minimum wage. Minimum wage is set by the Fair Labor Standards Act, as well as the idea of overtime and time and a half for overtime. So that went in 1938, and as long as you were paying your people above minimum wage and you were paying them time and a half, well, you were covered. You know, there were various state workers' compensation laws. OSHA came in, you know, roughly around that time. So occupational health and safety became important. A lot of your companies were union companies as well. So really a lot of the discussion and the things that sort of happened on wages and compensation benefits, all of that was more of your industrial labor person that was in charge of that. So you had the person for the organization who was in charge of negotiating with labor and was responsible for that. Well, as we became less unionized, as the union started to decline, and we moved there, we also had changes in the laws. We had the Civil Rights Act that was passed in 1964. We had various federal executive orders, which we follow, you know, for affirmative action, for veterans' rights, for disabled, and really with that, you know, for people to understand, you know, not to get too far in the weeds, but affirmative action, a lot of these other rules that are in there, if you're compelled to comply if you have more than $50,000 in government contracts. And for most companies, you might have you might be a multi-million or billion-dollar company, like for example Amazon, or somebody like that. Well, if they have one contract where they agree, okay, we're gonna bid and we're gonna ship these products to the Department of Defense, or we're gonna send this to some road project that's somewhere, you're now a government contractor. So just about every business that's in business is somehow, some way going to be contracted with the government. That if we do work at schools, or if we do work at, you know, colleges, universities, anybody that gets federal grant money, you all of a sudden you become a government contractor. So there's this sort of the misnomer that, oh, I have to be Boeing or one of these really big, you know, government contractors, you know, Lockheed Martin or whatever, in order to have to comply with the executive orders. You know, we all sort of have had to do that. But, you know, in the 70s, we had Age Discrimination Employment Act, which was passed. Pregnancy Discrimination Act was passed. We had really the big changes in 1990 and 1991. 1990 is when the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. And that was really the first time that there was not only the law, but there was also sort of the science of a lot of those things that were involved, because Americans with Disabilities Act requires that we do reasonable accommodations for people, and there's a negotiation part of that. So there's a certain degree of expertise that has to be involved in dealing with ADA. And then also in 1991, in response to Clarence Thomas and all of that stuff, sexual harassment came to the forefront. The Civil Rights Act was amended in 1991, which now created the idea of sexual harassment. And people don't realize that, and my students don't realize that really before 1991, it was perfectly legal as long as you didn't discriminate against people based on pay and based on promotions and all those things. You could treat them any way that you wanted. And you know, Jim, I know you remember back in the 80s, our parents used to bring home these joke sheets that had horribly offensive sexual jokes and racial jokes. And, you know, we would see those things and we look at that, and, you know, ha, 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 that's really funny. But I mean, literally people would make copies of those at work. And they would distribute those because there was no law against it. It was perfectly legal to sexually harass somebody, to give somebody a hard time, as long as you didn't overtly discriminate against them. And that was the other idea in the Civil Rights Act of 1991, is it created the idea of not only adverse action, the bad crap that you do, but also the idea of adverse impact. That if we have underutilization, if you have a workforce where you have qualified males and qualified females, if you're promoting 80% of the qualified males and only 40% of the qualified females, there may be a reason for that. There may be a requirement, you know, you have to lift this much weight above your head. Well, if the job doesn't really involve lifting, then there's adverse impact to that. So it sort of changed the idea of human resources as just being personnel and just getting bodies in slots. Now, all of a sudden, there was a certain degree of legal aspects that were behind it. And then also, you know, just really with the psychology of work, that as the internet age kind of evolved and people had more choices. You know, prior to the internet, if you wanted to get a job, you looked at the want ads, right? You bought a newspaper. You know? So you bought a newspaper, you knocked on doors. You know, I mean, those are the things that you did, or you went to job fairs. You know, those are the things that we did. But the internet allowed us. Yeah, I mean, the internet allowed us really to for the first time be connected to groups of people, and it really changed how we all interacted and how we work. So, you know, the more free exchange of ideas, employees became a little bit more aware. We also have become much more litigious. That when lawyers were allowed to advertise, because they weren't allowed to advertise until the 80s.
Right.
So when they were allowed to advertise, well, of course, you know, oh, workers' comp, well, you know, been underpaid at work, you know, call us, you know, sexual harassment, call us, big billboards, right? So part of it was defensive, but the other was just, you know, the nuance. So HR has changed. HR has evolved. You know, when you look at HR, we put you know, 6 major areas under HR that we normally look at. We have compensation and benefits. We have training and development. We have recruiting and selection. We have employee relations, which if you're a union company, it might involve you know, union negotiations and contracts, all those stuff. Industrial relations is what we typically call unions. And then the 5th area that would be involved in that is occupational health and safety. And then the final one that people kind of leave out of the HR is really more of the strategic people management, the way that people move in the organization. So then you're starting to talk about succession planning, where you kind of put all of those pieces together into one thing that we would call strategic people management. Or
they have to do with like
HR,
like shifts in positions and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it's a lot of planning. I mean, as you move up in your organization, you know, hopefully the more task things you at the bottom, you're just doing tasks, right? So if you get started in HR, maybe you're responsible for, you know, taking everybody's pictures and making badges for them and keying them into the system and getting all their new hire paperwork all in order. Those kind of things. Maybe if you go up a little bit more, maybe you're doing investigations, or you're involved in selection of benefits, open enrollment, those kind of things. But really, when you get to my level, and I still do a lot of task stuff too, but you also have to be strategic. You also have to look at that and say, okay, where are we going to be in 5 years? What are some of the technology things that we can leverage? How do we take advantage of certain opportunities? What do we see coming down the pike? Is if we see our business slowing down, being strategic and figuring, okay, what are some wins that we can have with that we slow down maybe some of these other things that we're doing, but we're going to speed up training, because when you're not quite as busy, I mean, that's one of the things that happens, is that when you're really busy, you're too busy to train. And then when you're not busy, then you don't have the money to train. So it's like, you have to kind of do that. So if you can start thinking about that in advance and kind of get your ducks in a row when times are good, saying, okay, if things do start slowing down, some of these initiatives we can really start working on, where do we deploy things? And if you've got somebody who's dedicated recruiter, what do you do when the music stops?
Right. And do you think that most companies will prioritize something like training and whatnot when there's a slowdown or something? Meaning, like, would some people like to take advantage of it and say, let's lay off a few people, or let's work people a little bit less and save a little money, or what kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. Hang on a second. I just got an email which popped up and made a noise. So about my email so it doesn't disturb us again. But yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the size of the organization.
Mm.
One of the things that I think has happened, and I'm very thankful that I don't work for a publicly traded company, that really publicly traded companies and companies that are owned by venture capital, they're really held to quarterly results. And
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I always think a little bit differently. There's the idea of profitability, and then there's the idea of sustainability. That my mantra is always try to be as profitable as I can, but also being sustainable. That the example that I use for managers is like a car. If you wanted to save money on your maintenance, then you'd never get your oil changed, which would make it more profitable for you. But eventually you're going to burn up the car because you never changed the oil. And I think with a lot of companies, they have sort of that mentality of just go, 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 constantly selling off units and pieces. I really don't know.
You're not maintaining like you would a car then.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not maintaining your people. You're not maintaining your systems. You're just constantly just go, go, go to try to maintain as much profitability as you can. And I don't know how sustainable that is.
Yeah, right. Another one for you to maybe turn a different corner is, what is something that you really were surprised about when you actually started working in human resources after you graduated? And if
Yeah. So yeah, I got into HR based on I was in sales. So I worked for ADP, which is the largest payroll company in the country. And prior to that, I actually worked in insurance sales. So I understood the insurance and the payroll and some of the HR management, because we were also selling HR services. But I think there are a lot of things, and it's probably like that in a lot of other things, but really with HR, I think there are a lot of things. It's almost like with traffic laws. I mean, it's with traffic laws, there's a lot of employment law that's like that. It's like speeding. If you want to be really, really ticky tack, right, you're going to go 68 miles an hour in a 70, because you're like, I just don't want to get pulled over. I don't want to get pulled over. Well, really, we know based on experience, you can probably go 78 or maybe up to like 82, and nobody's ever going to pull you over. And if somebody does pull you over, it might be a little bit of a pain in the neck. It might be a little bit of a slap on the wrist. But you know what? We're going to get there a lot quicker if we go 78 or 82 than if we go 68. So we're going to take the risk of going 78 or 82. But then there's other things that are like DUI or reckless driving, or driving without headlights, that are just really dangerous and stupid. So so I think one of the biggest things for me in HR is really, I guess, realizing how much of I mean, that's probably the biggest experience curve, is really realizing what's the really, really important stuff that we focus on versus what's just the day-to-day. It's really not that big a deal.
Like, a person could over worry, become overly perfectionistic or whatever, thinking that all these little things are going to come back to bite them or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense. Now, here's a
Like
question.
stupid stuff. Like for example, the posters, right? You have to post all these notifications that
Oh
are already
yes,
posters,
yeah,
right?
I've seen them everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And you're supposed to update them. You're supposed to, and there's all these services. We'll automatically do it for you. You know what happens when the Department of Labor or whoever comes in and sees your posters are out of date? They go, "Hey, your posters are out of date. We'll come back in 30 days, fix it." Okay. So then you just go online and you just print whatever the latest is and you slap it up there and you're done. So I'm not worried about posters and all
Is
that
that a
kind of.
regular thing? Like sort of they come in and check you out every few years or whatever?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean,
All
they
right.
just happen to randomly. They're really mostly the biggest one that you always have to make sure is you have to have your workers' comp policy posted in a conspicuous place. So I'm always very, very careful. January 1 of every year, the new policy always goes up on the board because I know that's the one you can get fined for and you have problems with.
All right. Speaking of like broader policy, this is kind of like a policy question. It's either if you were in charge, what would you change? Or here's the other way I ask it. Like in charge of the country or a country. But in the other another way of asking it is, in your opinion, what country has the best labor policies? You can turn that into whatever you want,
Um,
or human resources policies or whatever.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's really weird. I mean, that's what I guess one of the things when you do get into HR that you're in between, right? Your responsibility is really to protect the company. I define HR as all the activities surrounding attracting, motivating, retaining, and developing your employees. And really, when you look at that as your mission and how all that is, a lot of times government policies can be a brake, meaning they're going to slow you down. They also reduce your flexibility to reward top performers. That I am not a I'm not a union. I'm not really pro union. What I always tell people is I think the threat of unions is very important. I think it is, but like I wouldn't want to have to practice HR in a union environment because you have free riders, you have really reasons why you're not going to achieve the best performance because performing better doesn't make you more money. It's all based on seniority and it's all negotiated anyway. And I'm going to get paid the same whether or not I make 100 widgets or 150 widgets. So, from that sense, I don't like that. I don't know how necessarily to compare it to somebody else. I do think that we are too employer focused in our labor laws here in the United States. I think that there could be more employee friendly. I think fear of the S word, right? Socialism.
Right, right,
I,
right.
I think we could do a much better job in healthcare and retirement for employees. And I'm not necessarily sure if the employer should be responsible for that. I mean,
Oh,
if it's a
yeah.
tax, I mean, because we're already taxed, employers are taxed for Social Security and Medicare. That most people don't realize is you put in your 7.65% for Social Security and Medicare, your employer matches that.
Right, right.
And
You
if
may
you're
have told me that.
self-employed, you got to pay both. But yeah, your employer is contributing 8% of everything that you make to your Social Security and Medicare. So that's already happening. If maybe they change some of those things around, maybe the employer contributed a little bit more,
Yeah,
and you get rid of some of this stuff with the 401ks because that's really what's changed here in the United States is we used to have pensions and you went to work for a company like our parents, right? They went to go work
yeah.
for a
20
certain
years.
company. Yeah, they had pensions. And then the 401k came in about 1982. And all of those employers said, okay, all of you who've worked for us up until this time, we'll keep your pensions. But anybody else, we have this great new program. We were putting aside 6% of your pay into the pension plan. Now we're going to give you that 6%. And the great thing about that is if you go to another employer, if you do whatever, that's your money. Once you're vested, you can keep that money. And everything was really great And then when there were economic downtimes, they stopped contributing to that. And then you were left on your own. You had to contribute on your own. And most employers are contributing about 2 or 3% to their employees' retirement on the average. And it's just not enough. And relying on people to discretionary save, I mean, you need a new roof, the car
Right.
blows up, you've got other things that happen. You stop contributing, or you're just barely making it, the price of housing goes up, you can't contribute to your retirement. So we have a
Right.
huge retirement shortfall in this country. Um, and then healthcare too. It's just becoming
Right.
it's not sustainable. It's just not, our model is not
It
sustainable.
doesn't seem to be. Do you
No,
think,
it's not.
do
And
you
the
think it,
employers are fed up because
that's what I was going to ask.
it
Because
costs
why?
money every year.
Yes. Okay. So it costs employers and there's a risk for employees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective because well, you sometimes you hear on the radio, oh, it gives the employers more power because the employees are more dependent on them because their medical benefits are through the employer,
Right.
making them less portable because they can't just leave a job when they want to. But I guess there's a lot of sides to this.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. Would you think most employers are like, I'd rather not be handling people's health care and that sort of thing?
Uh, I think it depends on the employer. It depends on what they want to do. I mean, but for us, our benefits and our retirement are a value proposition. We have actually, our company, we have benefits that are probably better than, I would say, 95% of employers out there. We have fantastic benefits, especially for a construction company in Florida, which Florida is notoriously bad as far as their benefits
Right.
because, and
Right.
that's the whole thing is, you say about unions, and I'm not really pro union, like I said, but in states where there are unions, the non-union companies offer much better benefits because they
Oh.
know they have to compete against the unions. So that's what I said before about the threat. I like the threat of unions, but actually dealing with unions is kind of a pain. But
Magic. Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, we have great benefits. We also have two retirement plans. We have the 401k plan, but we also have our ESOP, our employee stock ownership plan. So we're matching about 13% of compensation for retirement, which most people aren't doing. So we're creating wealth for our employees because the $44 million in stock in the company is actually in retirement accounts with employees' names on them. So we're very unique. I wish more companies would do that. Would if they were employee owned, you wouldn't need a union, you wouldn't need a lot of other things. It almost sounds like Marxism, right? People control the means of production,
I
but you
know.
still have rules and regulations. You still have still have a process in order to go into that. But it's you get to live off your own wealth, which is pretty damn cool that you
Yeah.
create.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's interesting. Like, as far as I know, that it's almost a unicorn, kind of a thing. Is not a
Yeah.
lot of that happening now. Every time I hear about it, I'm like, really? Because
Yeah.
even I don't know if he's your CEO or whoever, but he was talking about it, very proud.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's cool. Where am I? Am I? I felt like I was in some old movie or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, here goes another, because I of course made some bullet points that are all over the place, just to keep some variety. Yeah, what are in any way do you have to deal with immigration policy or immigration HR stuff?
Well, we have to comply with the IRCA, Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. That's what created the I-9, by the way. I'm just getting HR geeky on you here.
What's an I-9?
I-9 form is the form that you have to fill out when you show up, where you have to produce your driver's license and your birth certificate to prove that you are who you say you are and you're eligible to work in the United States.
Okay, cool.
That yeah, American only policies are illegal under the IRCA. You can't say we only hire citizens. You can't discriminate against anybody's citizenship status. But you are required to make sure that they can work in the United States. And there are people that have social security numbers, but it says right on there, not valid for working purposes. So we use E-Verify. We have certain contractors we deal with that require us to use the E-Verify system. What that essentially does is, before E-Verify, if you provided a social security number or documentation that was fraudulent, there was really no way that the government or anybody could figure that out until the end of the year. Or in certain systems, you might get no match, but it's like, oh, okay, well, we don't match that. So you could actually you could have 5 guys working under the same social security number before E-Verify. But now E-Verify is in there, and you have to put the employee in there within 72 hours of hire. And if they don't match up, you're supposed to just tell them, look, I need a valid, until I get the valid information, you can't work here. So so that's kind of changed things. We do have a large customer who, because we're recording this, I'm not going to mention the name, but we do have a large customer who requires that we hire auditors to audit our immigration stuff to make sure that we're not doing that. But you know, I mean, things do change. We do have a large Hispanic population. We've got an office in Miami, which is very close to Hialeah. We're in that section of Miami that and there's pockets. I think people think it's all of Miami. It's not, but there's pockets of Miami where literally nobody speaks English, and that's kind of where our office is. So we have a lot of people that are from Cuba and El Salvador and some of the other islands, some, you know, Jamaica, Haiti, that are coming over. So, you know, we do have those issues, and sometimes they do run into immigration. We're actually helping an employee right now to try to gain citizenship and keep his work status because he's a political asylum seeker from Venezuela. And we're different than most employers. We're actually paying for it. We like him. We think he's a great guy, and we'd love him to stay, and we want to keep him. So we're actually paying the fees for an immigration attorney to help.
Wow. And that's not something you have to do, apparently, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, it's I'm way out of my, and he's turning to me and asking me questions. I'm like, look, I am way out of school here. I do not understand this process. I hired you the attorney. That you know, hopefully that will help out. But you know, this is somebody we think has real opportunity to grow with us, and we want to make sure that can happen for them.
That brings up something, and that is sort of from your perspective, of course. And it's not just there aren't a lot of companies like you. It's a broader question.
Mm-hmm.
What how do I say this? When somebody's looking for a company, when someone's looking for a job, and they're sussing out different companies and things like that, what is something employees don't think to look for in a company that it would be advisable to look for? Like, I don't know, would employees benefit more if they knew more about how human resources worked?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think employees understanding that. One of the things, I guess, going back to one of your original questions about what surprised me in HR, and this is not just based on my current, some of it's based on my last HR gig too. And then just talking to other HR professionals, companies are really disorganized. I mean, they look like they're organized and like they make decisions that are all well intentioned and or mean spirited. You know, I didn't get my raise. They didn't give me my 90-day review. They didn't do what they promised me they were going to do. And I would say 99 times out of 100, maybe 999 out of 1,000, those are, you know, what we learned in Catholic school, you know, sins of omission, not sins of commission. Yeah. It's something that somebody failed to do something. They screwed up. They didn't tell HR that they promised you an extra week of vacation, or they didn't tell HR that something happened, or somebody was supposed to make a note of it. Your pay increase was supposed to go in. So if you're sitting there and looking and saying, oh, they told me they were going to give me a 10% pay increase, but I only got a 5% pay increase, those dirty bastards. No, it's probably somebody screwed up on the paperwork, or literally somebody may have fat fingered the increase. Or it might be they just typed it in wrong. You know, you were supposed to make $18.50 an hour and they put it in as $17.50. Something like that, you know, and that's one of the things that I think people feel like, because of the adversarial relationship maybe between the employer and the employee, that when the employer doesn't live up to our expectations, people think there's nefarious forces in play. Usually it's stupidity and incompetence. I mean, literally it is. It's just
Yeah.
somebody
So
screwed something up. Somebody
so make
did
a phone
something.
call, ask somebody, send an email,
Yeah. Yeah. Don't
reminder.
be afraid to get clarification. Now, make sure you're respectful about it. Say, hey, maybe I didn't understand you, but I thought I was supposed to be making X amount of dollars, not Y amount of dollars, instead of stewing in silence and thinking they're trying to screw you over.
Right. Okay. I don't know where I'm going to ask. What do you think of the gig economy? How's that affecting things, or love it or hate it, or
I don't know. I think a lot of people have, I mean, from my perspective anyway, I think people have, and I get a lot of this perspective from my students because I'm teaching a lot of,
oh yeah,
20s students. So this is more my side gig instead of my regular gig, right? So it's
yeah,
part of the gig economy too. Um, but no, I think everybody wants stable employment with benefits and retirement. I think everybody wants the same things. I think there's also, I hear this from some of the higher ups in my organization and people who are outside of that is, oh, these kids don't want to buy homes, they just want to rent. It's like, no, they want to buy homes. They're just not, they don't want to pay ridiculous amounts of money. They can't pay the entry fee.
yeah.
You
It's
know, it's
hard.
like, oh, they want the flexibility and they just want this and they just want that. It's like, no, everybody really wants stability, but when that stability is not paid back, that isn't good.
Yeah. So I don't know who you said that, but in general, I think you say people think that or say that. There are a lot of assumptions people make about employees, I think.
Yeah.
Even fellow employees, I think, make it. And one of them is like, I hear this all the time, and I wonder if you believe there's some truth to this, 1% truth, 100% truth. Uh, People just don't want to work anymore.
I don't agree with that. I mean, I think people said that about our generation too. Everybody
Right.
thinks the generation coming up is soft and not enterprising and lazy and all of those things that they call them. I think there's been a fundamental shift in the last 3 to 4 years that's made it a seller's economy instead of a buyer's economy. We
Like
always sort of,
selling your labor, you mean?
yeah, exactly. I was interviewed by Florida Trend about 5 or 6 years ago about how wages were stuck. I mean, we literally weren't paying that much. I started at my company in 2006. We were 10 years later and we were basically still paying people the same things.
Wow.
I mean, if you had seniority, maybe you got 50 cents or 75 cents or $1 raise. But essentially, wages were roughly about the same. I mean, we were hiring helpers in at $9 or $10 an hour in 2006, and we were hiring them at $10 or $11 an hour. Not just 3 or 4 years ago. So the situation has changed, and I think people have better expectations of their employer because they have choice. They have the comparison of choice that people are not just going to accept garbage employment. They're not willing to accept garbage benefits and garbage pay just because. And
Yeah. So employers could instead try to make themselves more attractive, more competitive.
I think so too. And
Labor.
I think the other thing is that with the generational differences, you're a psychologist, you understand how we get socialized, right? We get socialized at the home and in schools.
Yeah.
And the way that we were raised and the way that we were schooled was significantly different than how our parents were. We were a little bit more, hippy dippy or whatever, but it's still at the same time, everybody lined up in rows and you had this and
Yeah.
these were the certain things that we were responsible for. I think we have a generation that came up not only with more communication from their parents and from their schools, explaining to them the why. When we were kids, why? Because I said so.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it's like you litigated through power, right?
I tell
Just
my child, because you're going to be somebody's roommate one day. And if I don't like what you're doing, they're not going to like what you're doing.
exactly. Yeah. So everything's been explained to them, but you also have to look at the fact that these things right here, our cell phones and our information that we have information at our fingertips. So being an old school employer, well, I'll tell you when I need to tell you, that stuff doesn't work anymore. People do want to work, but you have to explain to them the why. I think we have a generation of managers that need to understand communication better.
Mhm.
Because when people understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and they see tangible results for that, they work hard. That hasn't changed,
Yeah.
and that part of it has changed. And I try to tell managers this all the time. I'm like, guys, we don't have to lower our standards as the employer, but we have to change the way that we communicate with our people. And I think that's the biggest change, and
Yeah.
where employers are shortchanging themselves, is they're not meeting that communication challenge. They're not looking at, how do we make work more like this, where we give people opportunities to understand a little bit better, whether that's leveraging technology, putting more money in training, I don't know, but
That's
you have
interesting.
to do that.
There's a lot, yeah, and I have a friend, and it's part of the whole orb of what you're talking about, but he was very frustrated. People don't want to work anymore. The kids don't want to work anymore.
Mhm.
And his life had been built on a very small business, um, generally. And I mean, it was huge for a small business. A lot of workers and a lot of resources to manage and product to get out, and it was perishable product and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Um, but he's getting into his 50s and 60s, and he's looking at how am I going to keep this show running as I slow down and
Yeah.
eventually retire. And that was part of the thing. It was a very personal. I've done this work for so long. Is it going to pay my retirement or not? I'm not sure if that's exactly what he's feeling, because I think he's pretty secure. But
Mhm.
that was part of his frustration, was at this point in time I should be able to delegate more, and people don't want to work. People don't want to take initiative. That kind of.
And I'm not so sure how much of that, and this is some of my personal experience too, but is it they don't want to work, or you don't
Yeah.
want to trust them. That's one of the things that's unfortunate in some companies. When you're with a company for a long period of time, people remember you when you were a snot-nosed kid. And it's really easy to hire somebody from the outside who supposedly has all these credentials. But I tell managers that all the time. You only know 15% of that person you're hiring from the outside, and the other 85% could be horrible. They could be a sociopath. They could, there could be all sorts of problems with them. By the way, sociopaths are excellent in interviews. Uh,
Oh,
we've actually had, that I know of, two, what I would say were, I'm not clinical like you are, but people that were truly sociopaths, that you would have them dead to rights in a lie, and they would lie their way out of the lie. I
oh,
mean,
what a skill.
it was amazing. It was actually absolutely amazing. And they have you fooled for a few months, and then after a while, the pieces just don't. They just
They just don't fit.
didn't. But yeah. So the person on the inside, you look at that 15%, and you remember that time way back when they got drunk at the Christmas party, or their buddy stole the car and they went on the joyride with them. Well, that was 10 years ago, and I think with companies, especially when you're working in labor intensive kind of places, most of the people that you attract at those entry level positions, it's you have choices in life, right? You work with your mind or you work with your hands. Well, they
Hmm.
weren't, a lot of them weren't really good at school, so they said, well, I have no choice but to work with my hands. And then they start to realize, hey, there's more to life than just doing this, and then they can expand. But we still remember them when they were young knuckleheads. So what I would advise your friend to do is really take another look at his people. What really truly do you have? Are we looking at this? Are we going on what we think or on what we know?
Yeah.
And what are going to be our criteria to evaluate that? Because you're not going to be able to get that from the outside either. So
Right. And it's very easy to repeat a common narrative because it's consoling.
yeah.
I'm not alone in this, but verify. Go out and find out
Hmm.
what your people really want and what motivates them, and that kind of. Speaking of up close and personal,
Yes.
you've told me some stories here and there over the years about like being directly involved and sometimes having to deal with family members and all this stuff because of various things that I didn't know had to do with the umbrella of human resources. I always thought there'd be some other department for things like, well, maybe I don't know why I should have thought that, but like people getting injured, but not just on the job, things happening off the job. I think does that happen for you, that some things seem like they're off the job issues, but you still have to take care of the employee and the company? I don't want to say anything out
Yeah.
loud, the example.
No, well, I think it depends on the culture. You know, we have a very paternalistic culture, and I use that in a positive way. You know,
Very what?
a very paternalistic
Oh,
culture. So, you know, we're like a caring father for our
mhm.
employees that you know, sometimes to a fault. You know, I mean, one of the things that we have to calm people down from is, you know, hey, we can't loan people money all the time, but we tend to try to be flexible for people when they have family crisis, and we get direct involved sometimes in some of those situations where, you know, and you know, and I even tell people this, you know, when for benefits open enrollment and why we do things and why we care for people so much. You know, we do truly care, and we do understand that if we have a high deductible, that they're real people with real budgets that have to pay that deductible. So we don't want to overcharge people for their health insurance because we know they have to feed their families, and we also know that they're going to forego health care if they can't afford it, which from a moral standpoint horrible, but also just from a company perspective, it's going to cost us more in the long run if they're not getting basic health care. Um, but you know, I mean, those are all important things, but also certainly from a selfish standpoint, you know, I mean, from the ability, what I said before, what is HR? Attracting, motivating, and retaining and developing employees. That if you have great benefits and you take care of people, those are the things that get in the culture, because culture is the way we do things around here. So we have a very, very strong culture that we take care of our employees, and we do that. We have that in the culture because it's been proven over time. You know, culture is, you know, things that are basic assumptions based on how things have been done over a period of time, and that's always been our culture, is to take care of people. I worked for an organization that kind of had that culture, and then we were bought out, and then we no longer had that culture, and that's why I left. That's how I got where I am
Wow.
now.
Wow.
You know, if loyalty goes both ways. I mean, if you show your employees loyalty, you're going to gain loyalty. And I've always been not really fascinated, but sort of driven by the idea of being an employer of choice. That somebody saying, you know, our company's Wigginton, somebody saying, hey, if you're going to work for a fire sprinkler company, you're going to go work for Wigginton because they treat their employees the best. You know, and that's a goal that I wake up with every day. And just like with you talking to the president of our company, you know, that's his goal too. So our goals are aligned. If somebody else took over and said, these people don't need healthcare, screw them. How come we're not doing what everybody else is doing and overcharging them and giving them garbage benefits? Why are we wasting all this money on benefits? You know, I would have to reevaluate if I still wanted to work for the organization at that point.
Yeah. You know that you teach students in HR. Is it just like students who may or may not even care about HR take the class? Some of them do it because they're interested, and some of them do it because it's an elective, or what?
Kind of a mix. A lot of my students are getting certificates in HR, whether it's because they have HR responsibilities and they want to understand that, or maybe they want a career in HR, so they're getting the certification in that. Some of them are taking the courses so they can get other outside certifications. There's two major ones in HR. There's a HRCI, which is HR Certification Institute, and then there's Society for Human Resource Management that also has a certification program. So they some of them are seeking that. Some of them it's an elective, and some of them, yeah, they're business students and they just want to learn more about HR.
Is there anything you've changed in how you teach it or what you teach and why?
Well, I mean, the evolution of what I've been teaching. I've been teaching since 2009. So you know, when Obamacare came around, that significantly changed my compensation and benefits program, because
Yes.
now all of a sudden you took employee benefits or health benefits from the discretionary to the mandatory. So you move that over. So, we talk about mandatory benefits, Social Security, Medicare, workers' comp, unemployment compensation. Those are mandatory government mandated benefits. And then now we moved, healthcare over there. So the Obamacare law changed a lot of how that course was taught, just because, that's kind of changed. With that, from the HR law standpoint, there's really nothing that's really changed necessarily. The only thing that I change is as I grow in my career, I learn a little bit more, and I can carry some of that information to my students, which is great. I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity for me, because I can take one to the other and then the other one to the other. So I'm constantly kind of being bathed in all the rules and regulations and everything. So then, it keeps me fresh as far as the things that I know and things that I do.
That's interesting. I think, yeah, the reason I asked that question is because, is there anything shocking that the kids weren't that wasn't in the curriculum? Not shocking, but mine that really needed to be in the curriculum. Not shocking.
Mm, I mean, nothing really changes. I'm very I'm kind of old school in the way that I do things. There's a lot of things that are out there where you can automate the courses, and then
Mm.
all you do is just create the questions and put everything on autopilot, and it's automatically graded. And then if the students have a question, oh, Professor Browne, my dog's aunt's cousin's sister has rabies, and I can't take the quiz. Can you give me an extension? There's obviously a lot of that goes on, but I make my students write. I do make them write discussion questions and answer them in long form so I can read that. And one of the most interesting things that I've seen over the last 3 to 4 years is the fundamental shift on what my students think the employer should be doing. That 3 or 4 years ago, my students were more employer based. Like if you ask them to interpret a certain legal case where somebody's suing their employer, or asking them, are unions a good thing or bad thing in your opinion? Because that's one of my discussion questions. What do you feel about unions? What are your thoughts? I would say that probably 80% of my students said unions were bad 5 years ago, and I would say it's 90% say that they're good now. So
Wow.
there's a huge shift in what people think their employer should be
Yeah,
responsible for. And I think that's just where we are right now, in talking about that shift of talent and shift but that to me has been, I mean, it's almost seismic,
that's
how much
interesting.
people
And
have
I'm not
changed.
horribly surprised, but it's interesting to hear some corroboration about that. Oh, by the way, my timer, that
Yeah, we can go a few more minutes if you want.
gives us a little discipline, but yeah, if it's not a hard fast for you, I just had a brilliant question.
Okay.
I really, really did. But,
Okay.
and I just wanted you to know that I really had a brilliant
I'm
question.
sure I would have had a brilliant answer to it.
It had something to do with, it might have been one of mine that I pre-wrote. Free speech at work. We already did
First Amendment doesn't apply at work unless you work for a government. So you
yeah,
don't
this
have
is
free speech. You don't have free speech, and your employer can fire you because you vote a certain way or whatever. But we don't have as many rights in that. That's one of the things too, is to understand that we really don't have that many rights. One of my mentors in HR told me before, HR or the company is not a democracy. It's
Mhm.
not. I mean, and people think that they have certain rights. They don't. They
Yeah,
really don't. That the employer really holds
I was
the
introduced to that concept a long time ago. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, there are property rights. The employer has the property rights, and you're working with their property and they're, using their.
Well, yeah. I mean, even as much as contract law. So non-competes. When you sign a non-compete agreement with an employer, your employer can have you sign a non-compete that holds you for 2 years from being able to compete with them anywhere inside of 150 miles from your home. So if you're a skilled tradesman or tradesperson, boy, that was horribly sexist. Sorry.
Oh,
If you're a skilled tradesperson and you sign a non-compete, then you could be restricted for up to 2 years in a geographic area that you can't do the business that you're certified in. And the courts have ruled that continuing employment, because in order to have a contract, an agreement, there has to be a meeting of minds and there has to be consideration. So there has to be something that both parties get from that. And the courts have ruled that continuing employment is consideration. So you're left with a choice of either you quit or you sign this restrictive covenant, this agreement, and you sign that thing and you're stuck.
yeah.
You either have to move or you have to change jobs for 2 years.
Oh, because of the area you're in, if you're going to practice.
Yeah. And we refuse to do that. Some of our competitors do that, and we're like, no, we're not going to do that. That's not our culture. That's not how we treat people. But you don't have as many rights as the employer as you think you do, and unless they're actually violating, especially in Florida, outside of child labor laws, we defer to the federal government on all of our laws. So unless you're discriminating against somebody based on their race, creed, color, gender, national origin, religion, disability, age, any of those protected status, pregnancy status, you're fine. So if you have and there's a certain degree of truth that if you're a 35-year-old white male and you work in a company that has majority white males and they fire you, you really don't have much of a leg to stand on. There's really nothing. They can fire you for any reason or for no reason. You have no rights as far as any protection under the law. Now, if you're the only African American female and you also happen to have a disability, you're kind of looking at kind of difficult ground legally for the employer. You do have to be careful. I think there's a misnomer that people have, and maybe in some companies there is, that if you have a protected status, you can't be fired. I don't think that's true. And I think if people practice HR that way, that's crap, because if somebody's not doing their job, or if somebody's being counterproductive, or they're being disruptive in the workplace, that you don't hang on to somebody just because they might sue you. Because I think mediocrity, if you accept mediocrity, you get mediocrity. So if you allow somebody to be mediocre, you allow everybody to be mediocre, in my opinion. But
I remember that being batted around in the old days, and like, oh, this guy's never going to get fired.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that is that something employers really believe, or is it something just the employees really believe, or whatever?
I don't hear as much of that anymore. I think employers have sort of realized it's like, hey, we can do things. It's okay, even if this person goes and complains to the EEOC, and we have to respond to charges or whatever. That's still, even if it costs us $5,000 in legal fees to write our response and a couple other things or whatever, that's still money well spent to get this person out of the environment because they're not being productive.
I had a guy
change that mentality.
I had a guy tell me online that he was somebody else got his job, and without saying it this way, he said a person of color got his job, and I said, well, maybe they just got hired, and they said, no. Later on, the employer or the hiring person, who was someone I knew, came and told me that they just had to do that because they had to meet a quota. And I typed back, well, maybe your hiring guy that you knew very well just wanted to make you feel good, or whatever.
Maybe. Well, and that's actually illegal. There's no concept of reverse discrimination. That it says gender, it doesn't say female. It says race, it doesn't say African American, Filipino, whatever. It says so. We all actually have a protected status. It's just really difficult to make the argument that I didn't get hired because I'm a white guy when 80% of the people that work there are white guys. The president's a white guy and the HR person's a white guy. So really, this concept of reverse discrimination, there's just discrimination. There's not reverse discrimination.
Yeah.
And making your race or your gender the qualified thing to hire somebody is illegal in all cases. no
Yeah,
matter
because that
what it
would
is.
break the discrimination laws.
Unless it is what is known as a BFOQ, a bona fide occupational qualification. So if you're hiring for a locker room attendant for the gym, and you're hiring somebody for the ladies section of the gym or the gentlemen's section of the gym, being a lady, it would be a bona fide occupational
Okay.
qualification. So there you go. A BF.
Ah,
There's a little HR law geek stuff for you.
that's what I'm here for. HR
That's
law.
what you're here for. Yes, BFOQ. But
All
unless
right.
it's a BFOQ, so age can be a BFOQ. They can require pilots to retire at 65. So there's certain things that are in there. Actually, Hooters won a case and said being female was a BFOQ for being a Hooters waitress, and actually Hooters won. So
I remember the days they had the posters of the guy wearing the Hooters outfit and
yeah,
saying, "Is this what you want?" or whatever.
yeah,
I think
they were.
nowadays they just have guys and gals doing it
Yeah,
anyway. You
there
know,
was actually a court case, somebody versus Hooters, but yeah,
I
they were.
remember that, and that's why they were putting it out.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's a dubious distinction, but that's where we came from, the originating city of
Yes,
Hooters
Clearwater.
and
Yes.
many other. We also came from the place that made Bahama Breeze, and now that's it. So I don't think I have any more exciting gotcha questions, except for
So
like,
you had one question who that was on your list that you didn't ask me, and who was my favorite economist?
oh my gosh, yeah.
So actually, one of my favorite economic books is by a behavioral economist by the name of Daniel Ariely, and it's this book here, Predictably Irrational. And it's a great book about the fact that the markets are not rational because people aren't rational, and the fact that we're motivated more by fear than we are by greed, and that you can certainly take advantage of people based on all of that. And a lot of the different experiments that he did, it's a fascinating book, but the different experiments that he did in order to try to prove some of his theories. So like he went to people at a grocery store and had they had a choice. They could either get a $10 off coupon, or they could pay him $5 and get a $20 off coupon. At first, he asked them how much money they were going to spend, and it was like 80 something percent of the people didn't want to part with the $5.
Yes,
Even
right.
though they would save 15
Yes,
net,
right.
they would
Yeah,
net
exactly.
$5 more in savings, and they had already admitted they were going to spend more than $20. And then he did something else too with kids with Halloween candy, which I'm not going to spoil it for you. You got to read that. But the fact that a lot of these things are just inborn, they're part of us.
Yeah,
Our fear of loss is a developed thing when we're children,
right.
and that we don't want
Opportunity
to give up.
seeking versus risk avoidance,
Yeah,
and also the sunk cost effect. And what's funny is I think people will sort of um, cost themselves money or credits or whatever if they don't like the unfair way that it gives money to someone else or something like that too.
yeah.
So they'll choose against their own interests, like you're saying. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff's fascinating. I have not read that book. What's the title of the book and the author again, just in case
It's
anybody watches this video?
predictably irrational by Dan Ariely, Ariely.
All right. If anybody watches this video besides me after it's put up, um, just this is Steve Browne. Contact him at blah 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 and all that stuff. Otherwise, let me. I wanted to try. Oh yeah, my last gotcha question was, if you were powerful enough to be regulating or creating policy, who would you sleep with? No, I'm kidding. That's just a bad joke, but I wanted to
My
throw
wife, of course.
that. Yeah, I was going to throw that in at the beginning, and then I thought, should I make this that kind of?
Yes.
And yeah, I guess that's it. I appreciate you doing this for me, Steve Browne.
Cool.
And
Awesome.
I'm going to stop the recording now. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.